We're going to look now at the issue of ageism. You might remember when we held this event last year that Patricia Sparrow, the CEO of COTA, gave us a presentation on the impact of ageism on older people in general. What we want to do now is to dig into that issue in a bit more detail, in particular, how we might identify and tackle ageism in the health sector. So our presenter for this session is Dr. Anne Ring. She wrote a book at the age of 83 now, just published about 3 years ago. Anne, welcome. We're really delighted to have you here to share your perspective and thoughts on what can we do to get rid of this scourge of ageism and potentially improve our ability to get people to reable themselves and own their own future.
It's very good to be able to be with you in this way, and thank you, Modern Technology. Now, I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that each of us is on, and by paying my respects to their elders, past and present. So elders should be important members of any society, but we're living in a society in which age is undervalued and youth is overvalued. And what happens with the undervaluing of youth is, what happens with the undervaluing of age is widespread ageism. Now, some of you might have heard an excellent overview of ageism in last year's forum by Joanna Maxwell of the Australian Human Rights Commission, and that's very worthwhile listening to it if you haven't already heard it. But I will be giving a brief summary of how I see ageism shortly in the lead up to tackling its presence in the aged care system. Now, first of all, though, I'd like to describe just one example of how ageism can hide in plain sight. Now, it came up in an article that I read last year in the Sydney Morning Herald, and this had me bristling because of how it highlighted a particular type of ageism. The title of the hard copy article was Challenges of Caring for Aging Parents, and it was written with the underlying assumption that when one's parents had grown old, it was up to their well-meaning children to help them in all sorts of ways, including their health care, and to jolly them along with humour to accept that help. And why that article had me bristling as an 82-year-old at that time, and most definitely old, and also most definitely competent in looking after my own affairs, this was the underlying assumption that growing old equals growing incompetent and needing help. In other words, definitely an ageist stereotype. And there was an interesting follow-up to that version of the article. When I was preparing for this talk, I came across what's very common, the longer digital version of that article, and buried towards the end of that version was a warning that I feel should have been put up front and highlighted in both versions. And if I could have the next slide, please, this is what it said. So, it's also possible to fall into the trap of benevolent ageism. Adult children may mean well, but their decisions could be based on some of the negative stereotypes around aging, like incompetence and vulnerability. And I'm certainly wondering if that's something that you might have come across in your work. And if we could have the next slide now. So I'd like to move on to flesh out ageism a bit more, what it is and its presence in the healthcare system as a basis for how we can tackle all of that in ways that can contribute to bringing about cultural changes to the healthcare of older people. Now, ageism is shorthand for the stereotypes, which is how we think, the prejudice, how we feel, and the discrimination, how we act, that are based on a person's actual or perceived chronological age. And most definitely, ageism can affect people at any stage of our lifespan. Now, importantly, however, ageism against older adults has emerged as being the most pervasive and potentially the most harmful. Now, that comes out very clearly in the WHO's 2021 Global Report on Ageism. In terms of the relative breadth of the problem, 60 pages were needed to cover all the factors relating to older people, compared to just 9 pages needed to cover ageism amongst younger people, or against younger people. And it's ageism against older adults is going to be my focus today. because we now have a pretty sound understanding about how ageism can impact older people's health and well-being in and out of healthcare. Now, within it, significantly, ageism comes from two sources. On the one hand, there is the presence of cultural and systemic ageism via structural, organizational, and provider level biases that threaten the provision of equitable and ethical healthcare, and including some evidence that healthcare professionals hold more negative perceptions of older people than those held in the general population. But what we also need to be aware of, on the other hand, and what is also therefore hiding in plain sight, is self-directed ageism. And there's considerable evidence that in a society where ageism is the status quo, negative internalized ageist beliefs are not only experienced more frequently in older adults' everyday lives, but are also strongly linked to their health and well-being. Now, research has shown that people with more positive expectations about aging live longer, experience less stress, and have a greater willingness to exercise and eat better. Conversely, when negative perceptions of aging are held, they can reinforce self-defeating behaviors that make us more vulnerable to disease and disability. Now, understanding that there are these two sources means that eliminating ageism in the health system needs a multifaceted approach that targets not only systemic issues and aged care professionals, but also older people themselves. Now, we're very fortunate that in Australia for the past several years, we've had the very excellent Every Age Counts campaign. Now, this is an excellent organization that was especially set up to tackle the complexities of ageism at a national level. Now, I'll be talking more later about the sorts of resources that it has developed for that purpose. But for now, I'd just like to show you a brief video that it made, inviting us to imagine a world without ageism. And if we can have the next slide and that video, and yes, that is Brian Brown's voice.
What is ageism?
I've heard of it, but I don't really know what it is.
Ageism? Is that really a thing?
Ageism against older people is stereotyping, discrimination, and mistreatment based solely on a person's age. It affects people in many ways and is so common and accepted, most of the time we don't even notice it. But maybe we would notice if it wasn't there. In an Australia without ageism, older people wouldn't automatically be less valued than younger people. With the same qualifications, it won't take them longer to find work, and they won't feel the need to hide their age from potential employers. We will get and not get jobs based on our abilities, rather than outdated stereotypes of what people our age can and can't do.
Yeah.
Knowledge will be shared, younger to older, older to younger, for the benefit of everyone, including employers. And older workers won't be forced out because of their age. Without ageism, older people's voices will be heard and given the same respect as everyone else's. Getting older will feel like an achievement, not a failure to be hidden or fixed. Birthday cards with belittling ageist jokes will disappear. Derogatory terms for older people will be as unacceptable as derogatory terms for race and gender, even well-meaning ones that unintentionally patronise. We'll realise only some older people live in nursing homes, only some are hard of hearing, and only some have dementia. Thinking all older people are the same will be as absurd as thinking all younger people are the same. Getting older will be a normal, natural part of life that happens to all of us if we're lucky. Being older can be 1/3 of our life and one of the best parts of it. Without ageism, we'll live in an Australia that respects everyone and everyone's future self, a place where we can all participate at every age. Older people who are pains in the bum will be treated the same way as younger people who are pains in the bum. No one's asking for special treatment, just equal treatment. Can Australia really get rid of ageism? Yes, we can. All these organisations have already committed to it. Visit everyagecounts.org.au to find out more and pledge your support. And let's make ageism in Australia a thing of the past.
Thank you. So can we now have the next slide, please? Yes, that's the one. And according to the WHO, ageism has far-reaching impact on all aspects of our health and well-being. It's associated with earlier death. It's linked to poorer physical health. It increases risky health behaviors like eating an unhealthy diet and smoking. It's associated with poorer mental health, and it's associated with a lower quality of life and contributes to social isolation and loneliness. Ageism also takes a heavy economic toll on individuals and society, and this in turn exacerbates other forms of disadvantage. Now, next slide, thank you. There is a growing body of research also that variously has surveyed both older people and health providers, showing how ageism has been found to manifest itself in the healthcare system. And it includes being based on misconceptions about older adults having certain characteristics such as cognitive decline, depression, apathy, immobility, loneliness, anger, stubbornness. Next slide, please. So, it's not surprising then that ageist communications are reported as a major issue, rooted as they can be in such stereotypes and the prejudice that can undervalue the competence and autonomy of older adults. Healthcare providers may, for example, oversimplify their explanations, interrupt, avoid eye contact, direct questions and decision-making to carers, discourage technology use patronizing terms of endearment like dear and love, Skype, and they use a high-pitched voice possibly, use elder speak, making older adults feel incompetent and disrespected, and they can trivialize or ignore their concerns. Clearly, what is needed to build trust with older clients is open and respectful communication, enabling them to express their concerns and receive appropriate care. I'll be talking more about how to achieve that later on, but first of all, it's also important to understand such communications in the context of other and systemic manifestations of ageism in the healthcare system. So if I can have the next slide, please. There is an excellent overview of them with a lot of relevance to what's happening in Australia and being reported in Australia in the University of Florence analysis titled Cato Florence Against Ageism. No place for ageism in healthcare. Authors stress the importance of this stance in the face of the longevity in aging that has led to an unprecedented expansion of the older population. And that's certainly happening in Australia as well as elsewhere. And this has led to an associated need for a major transformation of the organization of healthcare for the individual, as well as population-based focused approaches to achieve healthy longevity. Next slide, please. Now, they've identified certain systemic problems and described for each its manifestation, its consequences, and the remedial action needed. There's quite a long list starting with these two items, which I'll be coming back to later on, because both endemic and internalized ageism are barriers to adequate care, engagement in health-promoting behaviors, and accessing health and social care at an older age. Now, formative ageism refers to no education on older populations in curricula across educational programs, different health and social care providers. Next slide, please. This is next slide is covering clinical ageism, including focus on treatment rather than prevention, focus on isolated treatment of individual diseases using evidence not applicable to older adults, lack of involvement in care choices that might better align with the older person's priorities and preferences, age-based, unjustified and discriminatory denial of available treatment or preventive measures for older clients, deprioritizing older adults in acute and emergency care deliveries. And can we have the next slide, please? They also identified ageism in research, a lack of evidence-based medicine, healthcare system ageism, with a disconnection between healthcare settings and the community, ageism in the design and operation of healthcare facilities, ageism in healthcare access, ageism in healthcare technologies. Now, collectively, the authors say what is needed is the education of the healthcare and public health workforce and the stronger involvement of all providers who contribute to care, including social workers and informal caregivers. Furthermore, the evidence suggests a shift of healthcare systems towards integrated person-centered health and social care teams who receive professional education on the appropriate care of older adults, varying combinations of conditions, life circumstances, and health priorities. Now, in the broader area of population health, approaches need to incorporate goals for disease prevention and health promotion for older adults. Now, if we could have the next slide, please, which is repeating those first two topics. I've chosen them for two reasons. It's highly relevant example of the approach of the authors, and also because of how they highlight the value of aspects of education as agents of change. Now, first of all, there's the bundling up of the two sources of ageism that I mentioned earlier, the endemic or cultural and the internalized or self-directed ageism. Regarding their manifestation, the undervaluing of older people that permeates our culture is the root of ageism and self-care, and as I've mentioned, it can be internalized, therefore, with repercussions in the health context. Now, the consequences include all aspects of healthcare remaining outdated and inadequate to meet the expanding needs of the aging population. And the repercussions for older adults who internalize ageism can be a worsening of physical and cognitive health and a shorter life expectancy than older adults with positive aging beliefs. Now, this is partly because they may disengage from healthy behaviors since they can't see the value of them, and they might also refuse access to health and social care services because they don't feel that they deserve it. Now, what actions are needed to change these two levels of ageism? The recommendations are very broad and at the societal level. What is needed, the authors say, is education about aging and ageism in the general population and including in the current population of older people. Now, this is in order to dismantle the existing misconceptions and promote healthy behaviors across the life course, and to reinforce the understanding that every person has the same value regardless of age. There are also now interventions that support positive aging beliefs and that have been shown to improve aging perceptions and health. And the authors recommend that these interventions should be broadly disseminated and supported. And the next slide shows something of that, because I do want to mention here the sterling contribution to that made by the revamped Independent Living Assessments national and federally funded Live Up initiative that was mentioned earlier, and that's promoting healthy aging to older adults. I actually did the quiz and I followed through and found some excellent local suggestions for me in a variety of priority areas, from health and exercise to social connections, that have the potential to shine a more positive light on life as an older person. Next slide, please. So we want to go back to that Florentine list, and now I want to talk a bit more about the second topic, which is labeled formative ageism, which is due to a lack of education about the older population. Now, in the healthcare system, this is manifested through the reported absence of aging in curricula across educational programs for different health and social care providers. Now, a consequence of this lack is that the cultural norms remain unchallenged, and this in turn can result in the sustaining of negative attitudes against older clients. Now, most health and social care workers haven't received educational opportunities around aging and older people, and are therefore unprepared to respond to the preferences and health care and prevention needs of the older patients that they will eventually treat. The action to remedy this, again, it's about education, in this case more specifically focused through policies that are developed and implemented to ensure that aging becomes an integral part of any educational curriculum for health and social care professionals. And health and social care providers should also have the opportunity to participate in intergenerational activities involving older people. And I do want to stress how important such intergenerational connections are, as they've been shown to be effective in reducing ageism. So what I've been talking about up till now can be viewed as some of the macro issues relating to ageism in the healthcare system. What I'd like to move on to now is what I feel is the more immediately relevant part, thinking about what we can do now as individuals, whether in a leadership role or as a team member working with older people in the health arena, to combat ageism where we're working, and if necessary, in our own approaches that might possibly be filtered through unintentional ageism, and which could also therefore be described as hiding in plain sight. And in talking about all of this, I've identified some useful resources that can come into play, and they're the ones that can be drawn on workplace training modules targeting ageism as a provider priority. First of all, as promised, I'm going to talk some more about Every Age Counts and its resources and that are available on its website and under the action and resources links. So the next slide, please, which is about my suggestion for doing the challenging quiz, Am I Ageist? I've also done this quiz, and the answers do cover some key issues that are worth thinking about. And if you work in a group, maybe everyone can do it and discuss the issues raised afterwards. So the quiz is about our personal views. In the next slide, please. Then there's a fun activity, a doctored snakes and ladders game, where the players have to step into the shoes of an older person, dealing with various views and issues, some of which are ageist, the snakes, and some not ageist, the ladders. It's an interesting way of getting to see how older people might like or not like to be treated. And so, for example, we have as a snake that you receive a birthday card with a lame joke about older people being forgetful. And as a ladder, major cosmetics brand announces that it will stop using the term anti-aging. Now, the next slide, please. Third resource is Every Age Counts excellent magazine, The Real Old, which is a very readable counter to ageism in its various forms. And the next slide, which Brian Brown referred to, for those of you who want to be more actively anti-ageist, there is the place that can be signed and links you with the work of this excellent campaign. Now, if we can have the next slide, thank you. The next set of resources focuses specifically on language. Now, I spoke earlier about the problem of ageist communications, and there is no doubt that language matters. As the UNSW's Guide to Age-Positive Language points out, the way we talk about age influences the way we feel about aging, as well as the way we act toward different age groups. We need to shift from words that reinforce negative stereotypes, which in turn can influence the attitudes of the community and also industry and government decision-making, as well as contributing to self-directed ageism. So as examples of the changes that can be made, I'd like to mention 3 sets of guidelines to do with language. Each comes with an explanatory introduction, followed by columnized suggestions. And the first is the one I just quoted from, the UNSW's guide put out by its Aging Futures Institute. The way that it organizes its suggestions is via the 3 columns that you can see there. The first is the context of the communication, the second has suggested appropriate terms, and the third has the types of terms to be avoided. So as just one example, taking the second row, in the first column, the context is communicating with older people. The preferred suggestions in the second column include using the person's name and asking them their preference for how they wish to be addressed. And the third column suggests avoiding infantilizing or patronizing language such as old dear. If we can have the next slide now. Similar suggestions come from the next set of guidelines, which is the combined work of the Every Age Counts campaign and the Queensland-based Primary Health Network, and is entitled Every Word and Gesture Counts. Now, the third set of guidelines was developed by Dementia Australia and focuses on dementia language guidelines, and what it stresses is actually applicable to all the guide. That appropriate language must be accurate, respectful, inclusive, empowering, and non-stigmatizing. I should mention that I had a great mentor when it comes to non-ageist languages. For several years, I was a member of an organization that was the brainchild of social activist and retired journalist Val French. Now, the group that she founded was called Older People Speak Out, OPSO, and for several years it received federal government funding to hold annual media award events to recognize the best and most realistic presentations of older people and their issues from all around Australia. And Val had very definite views about appropriate language. One instance of this is how she forevermore affected my use of that very simple little word, still. And this was because she considered it an absolute no-no to say that an older person was still doing something as though that was something of a miracle at their age. Now, that certainly highlighted for me the need to understand the subtleties of language used in the aging arena. And appropriate language is appropriate language is an important part of the flip side of ageism, the development of age-friendly arenas. Now, there is now, for example, a growing international and national push towards age-friendly communities, and there is a vital role for older people to contribute their expert views based on their lived experience to create such communities, which aim to enable people of all ages to actively participate in community life, and which include the removal of age-related barriers that prevent participation and engagement by older adults. And in the health arena, I am full of respect for the KeepAble approach that is very much driven by that same motivation to ensure that every person has a right to fulfill their physical, mental, and spiritual potential no matter where they are on life's journey. And I admire its dual focus on wellness and ablement. Now, if we could have the next slide, please. Now, increasing work is also being done elsewhere on what is needed in an age-friendly health system. So the American-based John A. Hartford Foundation, for example, is part of a group that has done a huge amount of research and practical resource development for such systems, and it set out the following aims for age-friendly health systems: to follow an essential set of evidence-based practices, cause no harm, and align with what matters to the older adult and their family caregiver. Now, within these systems, age-friendly care is defined as health care that addresses your unique needs and wants. It can help you enjoy a better quality of life. It is care that is safe and is based on what research shows are the most important things to pay attention to as we get older. The 4 M's: what matters, medication, mentation, and mobility. And if we can have the next slide, please. The 4 M's are summed up in this framework. So what matters? Know and align care with each older adult's specific health outcome goals and care preferences. Medication, if medication is necessary, is age-friendly medication. Mentation, prevent, identify, treat, and manage mood and cognitive matters. Mobility, ensure that the older adults move safely every day in order to maintain function and do what matters. Now, you might already be aware that as a part of this age-friendly health systems initiative, there's a substantial bank of detailed resources and guides that have been developed for a whole range of health settings, including the home. Now, these are freely available online, and at this end of my talk, I'd just like to highlight a few of them. So if we can have the next slide, please. One of the resources is How to Have Conversations with Older Adults About What Matters, a guide for getting started. Now, research shows that adults want collaboration, kindness, and respect from their care team, and this preliminary guide has steps for care team members to get started quickly, adapt as you go, and embed conversations about what matters into your practice. A more substantial and wide-ranging approach for all that is provided in the following detailed toolkit: What Matters to Older Adults, a toolkit for health systems to design better care with older adults. And this toolkit provides actionable steps and guidance to ensure that every older adult's health outcome goals and care preferences are understood, documented, and integrated into their care by the entire healthcare team. And the third and fourth and very detailed resources are a guide to care for older adults in home health care, and that includes recommendations for how to implement a series of actions system-wide, how to build the will for change, and how to engage the whole community of carers in promoting age-friendly care. Now, it also has a companion document, a practical and easy-to-use workbook for home health care. Now, it's very good to see the evolution of such a variety of person-centered healthcare initiatives, aimed as they are at enabling older people to experience sensitive and appropriately individualized care. And what I wanted to show in my talk today is that recognizing and tackling ageism in the healthcare system and changing the culture are major tasks that must be done They can be done, and gradually they are being done to some degree and in some places. At the broadest level, there needs to be societal changes towards giving equal value to all ages. Every age counts indeed. And it makes huge sense if we take in the fact that ageism is the only ism that can affect all of us who are fortunate enough to live into old age. So that should give everyone a vested interest in tackling it. And that's the long game. And if we could have the last slide, please. So in the meantime, there's a lot of work being done and more needing to be done to combat ageism in the healthcare system. And there are multiple targets here. There are the old people ourselves needing strategies like Live Up, for example, to resist internalized ageism by building up our psychological resilience and developing a positive view of ourselves as equally valued citizens, able to be assertive in healthcare situations. There are the healthcare providers who have a vital role in addressing ageism as the primary points of contact in the healthcare system, and who therefore need to look inwards to examine their own views about older people and whether there is ageism to be dismantled through education to grow their understanding of how to provide appropriate, individualized care and optimally developing age-friendly health environment in which old flourish, and healthcare institutions which are essential in eliminating ageism at the macro level and should strive to ensure the provision of inclusive, compassionate, and evidence-based healthcare for older adults through collaborative care systems, integrating caregivers and providers specializing in their care while respecting their autonomy. Then there's the provision of appropriate and adequate education and training, and including an understanding of the importance of age-friendly language. And finally, the promotion of age-inclusive policies and laws that address structural barriers to the care of older adults. So that brings me to the end of my talk, and there may be a little time for Q&A questions, and I'm also very happy to answer questions via my website, anring.au. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks very much, Anne. There's a question just come in. Do you think that ageism will be really bad in the future because growing inequality is framed as an intergenerational war?
That is a real problem that we have to tackle, and that's why we really have to use every means we can to battle that, because that is the downside of the situation, that people feeling disadvantaged are going to sort of feel resentful of the other group, and we need to make sure that we don't have that other situation.
Yeah, and you often hear of the tsunami of older people coming to overwhelm society and our economy. Those sorts of dramatic and way overstated arguments are sometimes put.
Well, that's true. And the thing is that when people actually look at older people, and with the healthier longevity now, older people want to contribute, and the workforce problems, workforce ageism is a massive problem, because a lot of older people want to work and can't get the jobs because of discrimination. So, there's that situation. And there's the thing, as I say, that older people being healthier live healthier lives for longer and are less of a drag on the economy. And older people do so much volunteering. And there's a massive contribution that they do in that area that is often overlooked. So there are many ways in which older people actually are, sort of contributing to society. And I think that really needs to be highlighted. And, sort of people need to understand that. Yes.
Absolutely. I'm chair of Meals on Wheels Australia, and we're very reliant on the role of older people to be volunteers. But also that contribution is a two-way thing. When older people do volunteer to work in a service like Meals on Wheels, they in turn gain substantial benefit from that activity.
Absolutely. I mean, this is why volunteering is something that I really emphasize in my book on aging, that all the satisfaction that people can get from that. And as volunteering and as, again, sort of career changes. Older people are doing some very interesting things in their second and third sort of iterations. As Brian Brown pointed out, there's another third of our lives, and we're, as you can see from what I'm doing and what you're doing, we're here. And
Yeah, absolutely we are. I just wanted to finish on one question that I thought of as you were presenting, and that's some of the lessons we got from COVID. I mean, during the pandemic, one of the parts of the population that was most affected were older people. And I just wondered, in terms of access to healthcare, which is one of your themes in your presentation, what your reflections on any lessons we learned out of the COVID pandemic?
Well, I certainly think that people need to understand the needs of older people in that sort of situation, and there are a variety of ways of providing healthcare through, sort of telehealth and so on, which I think really needed to be very much sort of upfront with that situation. But yes, it's an area that I have to sort of think a bit more about. I have to say, Paul, it's a very good question.
Yeah. And on that front, the Human Rights Commission has recently published a review into what happened during COVID, and they've actually got a section specifically on what happened for older people. So I'd recommend people to look that report up.
Well, I think also we do need to sort of reflect on what happened in the aged care homes. The ones run by the government were all very successful because they had the right amount of staffing, and the ones run by private care had an enormous number of deaths because they were cutting staff at the time when it was needed most. So I think that's an issue as well, sort of we really need to see what worked and what didn't work.
Yes, I agree. Thank you very much, Anne, for your inspiring presentation. And I loved the way you weaved lots of practical resources that people could look up as well. Thank you very much.
I hope they do. Thank you, Paul. Bye for now.